Mary Eleanor Wheeler stood in the Hampstead mortuary on the 25th of October, 1890, beside the sister of the woman lying on the slab, and said that it was not her. 8 weeks later, she was hanged at Newgate, having explained nothing to anybody, including her own mother. She was 24 years old. The name she went by in the police reports, in the newspapers, and on the indictment was Mrs. Pearcey, and it had come from a carpenter she had lived with years before and never married. He was alive that autumn, working in Camden Town, and he gave evidence at the inquest. Inspector Bannister had brought the two women in together. Clara Hogg knew the clothes and said so, but the face defeated her. Bannister took them out, said that surely a relative who had lived in the same house could form an opinion one way or the other, and brought them back to the slab. Clara looked again and hesitated. The woman standing next to her took hold of her arm and pulled her away from the slab. Then a doctor washed the blood from the face, and Clara said at once that it was her sister-in-law. When she put out a hand towards the body, the woman beside her drew back and told her not to touch it. By the following afternoon, Mary Eleanor Wheeler was under arrest for the murder of Phoebe Hogg, and on suspicion of the murder of Phoebe's daughter, who was 18 months old. Between that afternoon and the morning of the 23rd of December, she gave 4 different accounts of one Friday, and then she stopped talking about it altogether. What is known about her comes almost entirely from people who watched her from the outside. That is the kind of life this channel goes looking for. One witness at a time. Subscribe and stay with it. One of those witnesses was her mother. In December of 1890, with her daughter under sentence of death, Charlotte Wheeler made a sworn statement about her. The daughter had been born at Idham in Kent on the 26th of March, 1866, and christened a month later. At home, she was Nellie. Her father, James Wheeler, was the village policeman and had been a sailor before that. Charlotte Kelly had married him against her family's wishes and been dropped by them for it, having been intended for an architect. A man in Idham who remembered the household said that off-duty the constable played with the village children in the road. On duty he was another man altogether, and the children did not care to speak to him. When Nellie was 2 years old, she fell out of her nurse's arms in the garden and struck her head on the stones. Nothing seemed to come of it at the time. A few weeks later, she began putting her hand up to the place where she had hit it and crying. When she was old enough to put it into words, she said that her head hurt her and that she could not tell what was the matter with it. She had fits from then on, and her mother had them too. The Wheelers left Kent for London and moved through a series of rooms in Stepney, ending in Maroon Street, Mile End. Of the 5 children, the second daughter died of pneumonia before she was a year old. Nellie went to school in Wapping and then in Cannon Street Road, and got as far as Standard 6. She read a great deal. Years afterwards, she could still put a line of Longfellow into a love letter. Nellie Wheeler was 16 when that year began. She had been serving in her uncle's newsagent shop in Stepney, where she was his favorite niece. Then she went out to service as a nursemaid to the new baby of a German family named Prümmer in Whitehorse Street. The mother of that house said afterwards that the girl had been a great favorite with the whole family for her gentleness with the child. In July, Nellie had a bad seizure in that house. She was too ill to go on with the work, and the family let her go. In the middle of August, her father was carried home from the Hermitage steam wharf at Wapping, where he had been a delivery foreman for 14 years, after an accident at his work. He died 48 hours later. The wharf money stopped with him. In September, her mother fell ill and was taken into the sick asylum and stayed there 4 months. That left a girl of 16 in the rooms in Maroon Street with what was left of the household, and with a mother in the asylum and no wages coming in from anybody. Some months after the funeral, with her mother home again, Charlotte Wheeler and a neighbor called Mrs. Buckley came in and found her in time. Between them, they saved her life. It was not the first attempt. Not long before, Somebody near the River Lee had heard a splash and gone in after her. No doctor was sent for over either occasion, and nothing Nellie said about them was written down at the time. Her mother lived on. She kept the rooms and buried a husband and a daughter, and she died in the end in the infirmary of the Stepney Union Workhouse at Mile End. 8 years after the wharf accident, with her daughter in Newgate under sentence, Charlotte Wheeler stood in front of a reporter and went back to that August. They had kept such a good home, she said, and in all their life together, there had never been a bad word between them. And then, of her husband. If he had been alive, poor man, it would not have happened at all. She was talking about a girl who had left her house 4 years after that year ended, and had not lived under her mother's roof since. John Charles Pearcey was a carpenter and joiner with a place in the High Street, Camden Town. He met Mary Eleanor Wheeler in 1885, when she was 18 or 19, and they lived together for a time before he left. They never married. At the inquest, he said he saw her often enough afterwards, standing at her own gate as he went by. She kept the name. For 5 years, to every neighbor in the street, to the police who came to her door, and to the newspapers that printed her face, she was Mrs. Pearcey. By 1888, Mrs. Pearcey had 2 rooms on the ground floor at number 2 Priory Street in Kentish Town. The passage light of that house was hers to see to, and she saw to it. Elizabeth Rogers, 4 doors along at number 7, gave her the family mangling to do, and went on giving it to her for years. In the autumn of that year, Mary Pearcey was writing letters to a furniture remover named Frank Hogg about a woman he had got with child and did not want to marry. The letters were still in her rooms 2 years later when the police went through them, and they were read out at the Central Criminal Court that December. One was dated the 2nd of October, 1888. According to the account of them given in court, Hogg had been writing that he might leave the country or make away with himself rather than face what he owed Phoebe Styles. The woman he was writing to told him to marry her. She wrote that she would love his wife because his wife belonged to him. He married Phoebe Styles that November. By his own evidence in the witness box, his visits to Priory Street began again at Christmas and went on for the next 2 years. Phoebe Hogg was 31 or 32, depending on which paper you read that week. Her daughter, christened Phoebe Hanslope, had been born on the 11th of April, 1889. There was a sick father at Rickmansworth and a sister, Martha, who came up from there to see her. The Hoggs had rooms on the Prince of Wales Road, a few streets from Priory Street, in the same house as Frank's mother and his sister Clara. They kept no servant. Frank Hogg had a key to the rooms in Priory Street and had carried it for about a year. He was there 2 or 3 times a week. His wife, he said in the witness box, knew nothing about Mary Pearcey. At Christmas of 1889, he took her there to be introduced. The 2 women met as friends of the same man's making, and the visit lasted 2 nights. He and his wife had one bed. The woman of the house had the other. In January, his wife was taken ill and could not keep about the house for 2 or 3 weeks. There was no one to nurse her and nobody to mind the baby. Mary Pearcey offered and came, arriving in the mornings and going away at night for as long as it lasted. Frank Hogg put that illness in January when he gave his evidence. Phoebe's sister put the last meeting between the 2 women in February and said there had been none after it. About 3 weeks before the end of October, an unsigned note came to the Prince of Wales Road asking Phoebe Hogg to come to a public house. She went. Mrs. Pearcey crossed the road to meet her and put a plan to her. The 2 of them should go down to the sea, to Southend, and look over an empty house there. The baby was to be left behind with a nurse. Phoebe said she would think it over and let her know. What she thought of it, she said to her own family. She said to her sister that if the writer wanted a visit from her, she would be waiting a very long time. To her niece Elizabeth, she was plainer than that. Why, I might be thrown over the cliffs, and none of you would know anything about it here. On the 23rd of October, she went to Finchley Road Station to meet Martha off the train, and she had a note with her. It was written in pencil on an odd scrap of white paper, with no date on it and no address. She showed it to her sister and to her niece and told them she knew the writing. At about 11 the next morning, a boy named William Holmes was stopped in the road on his way back from the shop. He was 12. A woman he knew by sight gave him a penny and sent him 100 yards down the Prince of Wales Road with a note, telling him to put it into Mrs. Hogg's own hands. The note asked her to come round that afternoon and to bring the child, and it ended with 2 words, "Do not fail." At about 10 minutes past 3, Phoebe Hogg put her daughter into the perambulator and left the house. She left a note on the table for her husband, telling him to look in the pot and that she would not be long. Clara watched her from the door and saw her turn right towards Priory Street. At about 3:30, Charles Britt, a man of about 60, passed number 2 and saw a woman in a brownish hat and jacket knocking at the door with a perambulator beside her. As he went by, the door opened. Next door at number 3, Charlotte Piddington had a wicker dress stand to give back. She had borrowed it on the Tuesday, and she carried it out to the low wooden fence between the 2 backyards, about 3 feet high, and put it over. Then she called Mrs. Pearcey by name over the fence, 5 or 6 times, the way she always did. Nobody answered. A moment before, she had heard glass smashing somewhere downstairs, and while she stood there, she heard it again, and she heard a child cry out, a sound like a child in pain. She went indoors and stayed upstairs. When she came down to bring in her washing, because it had come on to rain, the dress stand had gone from the yard. Sarah Butler lived on the 2nd floor of number 2. She came home at about 6 and found the passage dark, which was not usual, because the woman on the ground floor saw to that light. Just inside the hall door, she walked into something bulky, and out of the dark Mrs. Pearcey's voice told her to mind. Butler said she could feel what it was. She went up, and when she came down 10 minutes later, the passage was empty. Elizabeth Rogers, the neighbor who gave Mrs. Pearcey the mangling, came round from Bonny Street towards the railway arch a little after 6. In the middle of the road, a woman was pushing a perambulator, heavily loaded, covered over with something black, higher at the head than at the handles. Rogers knew her at once, and when Mrs. Pearcey saw Rogers, she dropped her head over the handles. The road is narrow there and goes uphill, and she was having difficulty. Half an hour later, Annie Gardner, on her way to the shops, looked straight into the face of a woman coming the other way with a perambulator piled high and tucked down with a black shawl. The load was far too heavy, she said out loud to the little girl she had with her, and somebody must be moving house. The road that woman was on ran past the houses where the Hoggs lived. At about 7 that evening, a young man named MacDonald was walking along Crossfield Road in Hampstead, a quiet road in a well-off part of the suburb where new houses were going up. He saw a woman lying on the ground, took her for drunk, and walked past. Then it struck him that she might be ill, and he turned back. The spot was midway between 2 lamps standing about 200 yards apart. He went to Swiss Cottage for a constable. A doctor was fetched from Belsize Park, and the doctor put the death at about an hour earlier. There was almost no blood on the ground where she lay, and Lloyd's weekly newspaper drew the plain conclusion from that on the Sunday, which was that she had not been killed there. Near her, the police found a blood-stained brick, and a small screw nut was picked up afterwards. Later that night, a constable in Hamilton Terrace, about a mile away, found a perambulator standing at the curb. It was blood-stained, and its porcelain handle was broken. In it were a brown goatskin rug lined with scarlet cloth, some hair, and a piece of butterscotch. At about 8:30 on the Saturday morning, Frank Hogg asked his sister to go round to Priory Street. Clara Hogg got there at about 9, and Mary Pearcey opened the door and said she had only just woken. Clara asked whether Phoebe had come there yesterday, and was told no. She asked whether she had seen anything of her at all, and was told no again. In the bedroom she asked a third time, and the answer changed. "As you press me," Mary Pearcey said, "I will tell you. Phoebe had come, at about 5 o'clock, had wanted the baby minded for a while and been refused, and had asked to borrow money and been refused that too, because there was only a shilling and 3 halfpence in the purse. She had also asked particularly that nobody be told she had been there. They went to ask at Kentish Town Station, separated for an hour and a half, and met again at the Hoggs' rooms. There Clara noticed the state of Mary Pearcey's hands, which were cut and bruised and scratched. She was told it was from killing mice. Then the landlady, Mrs. Barrard, came in with a newspaper and asked whether they had heard about the murder at Hampstead. Clara said her sister-in-law had not been home all night, and that from the description she was afraid it was Phoebe. The answer was that Frank would bring her back from Rickmansworth all right. They bought several papers and read the accounts, and Clara said they must go to the police station. The other woman came with her. What happened at the mortuary happened in front of Clara Hogg, and it was Clara who was pulled away from the slab by the arm. "Don't drag me," she said. Afterwards, they were taken on to Portland Town Station to look at the perambulator, and Clara knew it as well. The handle was broken, the springs had carried something heavy, and a nut was missing from it. The last time she had seen it, it had been going down the street with a child in it, and her sister-in-law walking behind. At 6:30 the next morning, a hawker named Oliver Smith, who lived at Wild Hatch Lane in Hendon, went out to look at some horses he had grazing in a field by the Finchley Road. Inside the hedge, 5 or 6 yards from the footway, among the nettles, he found her. She was fully dressed, apart from 1 boot and 1 sock, and her clothes were soaked through with the rain that had fallen in the night. Dr. Biggs saw her at about 8. There were no marks of violence. She was taken to the Hampstead mortuary and laid beside her mother. By the middle of that Saturday afternoon, Bannister had decided to have the rooms searched. Mary Pearcey made no objection, handed over her keys, and then asked to go along, because she did not think the officers would manage the door. Sergeant Edward Nursey took her there at 3:30. The kitchen door was locked, and she opened it. The room was dark, because the green blind was down in the middle of the afternoon. Nursey pulled it aside, and saw that 2 panes of glass had been broken out of the window. She said she had been trying to catch mice and had broken them. The fragments had fallen outside into the yard, which meant the panes had gone out from within the room. Bannister came with Superintendent Beard. In the table drawer were 2 carving knives with blood on the handles. A long, heavy poker with a ring handle stood in the fender. The hearthrug was soaked with paraffin. There was blood on the ceiling, on the walls, and on the window sash, and lace curtains that had hung in there. At room 3 days earlier had blood on them. Among the ordinary things of the household was a card case with Frank Hogg's name on it. Dr. Bond came the next day to look at the kitchen. The spots on the ceiling and the walls, he told the court later, were round, like splashes of mud thrown up onto a wall, and not what an artery does. Whose blood it was could not be established, because in 1890 no test existed that could answer that. Bannister carried the knives and the poker through to the parlor where Mary Pearcey was sitting. She whistled. He went off to take statements, and when he came back, she was still whistling. The charge he then put to her was the murder of Mrs. Hogg, with the murder of the child on suspicion. She got up out of her chair and said that he could arrest her if he liked, that she was quite willing to go, and that he had made a great mistake. At the station, her gloves came off. Under them, she was wearing 2 wedding rings, one of brass and one of broad gold. On the last day of the trial, the jury went out at about 20 minutes past 1, and the black cap was already lying on the bench beside the judge. He kept his seat a quarter of an hour, expecting them straight back. They were gone 52 minutes. The trial had opened on the 1st of December at the Central Criminal Court, which London called the Old Bailey, before Mr. Justice Denman. Lloyd's weekly newspaper noticed that Mary Pearcey looked much improved since the police court, in a brown cloak instead of the black crepe cape, and that she answered both indictments in a firm, soft voice. Then she sat down in the middle of the dock, crossed her hands in her lap, put her head well back, and stayed like that for 3 days. The case was circumstantial from end to end. The judge's point to the jury was that in a premeditated murder, an eyewitness is not a thing anyone should expect to have. Mr. Arthur Hutton, defending, took the same fact the other way. The evidence, he said, was of a kind it would be dangerous to treat as conclusive, and a guilty woman could have got away easily and had not. He called no witnesses. She gave no evidence herself. The judge had no patience with the husband. No man, he told the jury, ever gave himself a viler character in a witness box. 2 objects did more work in that room than anything said in it. One was a button that matched the buttons on the dress the dead woman had been wearing. The other had come out from under a pair of black kid gloves at Kentish Town Station, and Bannister took it to the mortuary and put it on Phoebe Hogg's finger. It fitted the finger, and it fitted the mark left in the flesh where a wide ring had been. Frank Hogg and the jeweler who had sold him his wife's ring both swore it was not that ring. The jury came back at 2:15. There was something in the foreman's voice when he gave the verdict. She did not move. Asked whether there was any reason sentence should not be passed, she said she was innocent of the charge. The judge put on the black cap and told her he could not conceive of the death of Phoebe Hogg taking place without her being an active instrument in it. Mary Pearcey's solicitor, Mr. Freak Palmer, went to work on the 3 weeks she had left. He put together what could be got about the fits, going back to the garden at Ightham, and about the 2 occasions when she had tried to end her own life. Then he laid the file in front of the Home Office. On the 16th of December, they wrote back that an inquiry under the Criminal Lunatics Act had been granted. 3 doctors saw her that week. The interview lasted about an hour. They did not find legal insanity, and her papers were marked with the sentence that the law must take its course. She asked for 1 visit. Frank Hogg was given permission to come on the Monday afternoon and did not come. The Weekly Dispatch reported that she had been counting on seeing him. When it was clear he would not come, she lay on her bed with her hands over her face and cried without speaking. And when it had passed, she got up, her voice quiet again, and went back to her reading. She left a letter for Clara Hogg, clearing Frank Hogg of any part in what had happened. To her mother, to her solicitor, and to the chaplain, she said nothing at all. Mary Eleanor Wheeler was hanged at Newgate on the 23rd of December. The Sheriff of London had ruled that no reporters would be admitted, the first time that had happened since public executions ended in 1868. The papers protested that an official statement was not the same thing as a witness. The bell of the church next to the prison did not toll, because there were people ill in the neighborhood. Outside, a crowd waited for the black flag. When it went up, a boy shouted that she was gone forever, and the shouting turned into cheering. What she said last is not agreed. The executioner wrote in his memoirs that she called her sentence a just one, and a good deal of the evidence against her false. The chaplain gave it as the sentence being just and the evidence false. One paper wrote that she added nothing whatever that explained anything. Madame Tussauds bought the contents of her kitchen and the perambulator and put her in wax in the Chamber of Horrors. 30,000 people came to see it. The perambulator that Phoebe Hogg had pushed out of her own front door on the 24th of October, with her daughter sitting in it, stood behind glass in a room people paid to walk through, and out at Finchley, the two of them lay under one brass plate with the same date on it twice.